nowadays I see players against knight f6 playing like knight c3 here and going into the 4 knights, which is a very, honestly, harmless opening overall, just to avoid the Stafford. And maybe we can discuss a little bit why players are doing this. Why are people so afraid? Well, black does have tricks in this opening. There's lots of little ways to go wrong. But I think people just get nervous, and then they don't like losing to these tricks, and they feel like objectively it's not a great opening, so they should be able to crush it. And then when they lose to it, and they can feel their opponent, laughing at them, it's like, I think that really drives some players up the wall. But I don't think it should. I think, if anything, we should be happy to see this opening. And I don't think you should accept every gambit. And I've also noticed that a lot of players, they kind of have these weird philosophies. Either they accept every single gambit 100% of the time because it's supposed to be bad and that's how you beat gambits, or they reject gambits altogether because they feel like it's playing into the opponent's comfort zone. They're like, oh, well, if they're hoping for the gambit, then I'm just going to reject the gambit. And I think there is some logic to both sides of the argument here. But my recommendation would be not to be so black and white 100% one way or the other, right? I think there are some gambits that we should accept and beat them because objectively we get a good position. It's easy to play. There are other gambits that, in my opinion, are not really worth going into because you might have a simpler option and still get just as good of a position. So one example I like to use is the Smith-Morra. Now, objectively, I don't think the Smith-Morra is that great. I don't think white is like getting a big advantage here. But as black, as a Sicilian player, I already have to deal with the c3 Sicilian as it is. And against the c3 Sicilian, I play knight f6 here. Main line is to go e5. I go knight d5, d4, and then main line is to take. In this position, I'm happy to play as black all day. Against the Smith-Morra, after d4, after black takes this one, if white plays c3, again, you could accept the gambit, and more power to you, totally fine. But you can also play this move if this is part of your repertoire. And now white doesn't really have a better move than e5. And then after knight d5 here, we're just transposing to the main line of the c3 Sicilian. So from my point of view, if I'm already willing to play this line as black, already willing to go into it, provided that my white opponent starts with c3, then to me there's no difference whether they start with c3 or d4. We're getting the same position. I don't really see the benefit of having to learn a new system against the Smith-Morra. It's not like the Smith-Morra is winning for black if you learn all the lines. I think it's a very, very playable and very interesting opening for white. I think it's dangerous. With that, let's talk a little bit about different gambits. I feel like the Smith-Morra is a gambit where you kind of get long-term initiative. And this is the one thing why I don't really recommend the Stafford Gambit. I'm sure a lot of people really enjoy it and they have fun with it. To me, it's always seemed like an opening where you're playing for these early tricks, and then if they don't work, you often just end up with a much, much worse position, and we'll see how in just a sec. Smith-Morra here, there are tricks, but this is really just about the long-term compensation. White gets very quick development. White gets lots of open lines for the pieces. The rooks almost always come to c1 and d1. And this is an initiative that drags on deep, deep, deep into the middle game. Same thing, in my opinion, happens with the Benko Gambit, which I think is another gambit that is going to survive long term. Now, I know that the engine these days is giving white a big advantage in these positions, but from a practical sense, it's really not that easy. And again, it's not like black is playing for just quick tricks here. They're getting long-term compensation by putting their bishop on this diagonal. Once black castles and the rook on f8 gets to b8, white gets long-term pressure against white's queenside. Actually, we did a whole video kind of ranking gambits, and we talked a lot more about different gambits and how we feel on them. That's on the Dojo's YouTube channel, Dojo Talks Gambits. And we rank all our favorites and so on. And yeah, we kind of talk about which gambits we think are playable at different levels and which ones are mainly just for trickery. Yeah, and some gambits actually shouldn't be accepted at all. Actually, a good example brought up in the chat is the Vienna. I don't think the Vienna Gambit is a real gambit, because if black takes on f4 here after e5, white already has a crushing position. The knight has to go back to g8, and it's just really, really bad for black. White will certainly win back this pawn and then have just a fantastic version of the King's Gambit. So the Vienna, I don't even consider this one a gambit. I think this is just a normal opening. The King's Gambit, I do consider a gambit. There are different ways of playing against it. Personally, I like to take on f4 here as black, but there are different lines. You don't necessarily have to accept the pawn, though it is, I think, totally fine.